as someone who was born in the UK but was raised in the States, and also spent about 6 years in South Korea teaching and doing studying and other things as well, I have seen 3 different scenes at this point. I've not only seen them, but I've lived them. And I dare say that people, the comments I've heard are very, I guess, a bit skewed. I guess I see that people in the UK tend to have a skewed view of what actually goes on in the States, as well as what goes on in other countries. There was a Japanese man that came in the film that said something about music and the fact that he brought hip-hop, to Japan and how they reacted to that. If you were to know right now what people are doing in South Korea with hip-hop, with Vogue, with what we call, I guess, well, there are some other things, but anyways, what they're doing with this kind of heritage from Harlem, if you really knew what people were doing, you would be shocked out of your mind. It's not just about what's going on in the UK, it's not just about what's going on in the US, it's happening all over the world. And the fact is that wherever you go, the context is different. And so you can't just apply something across the board and say this is what the scene looks like or what's being dealt with in this way. It's so different. And I think what's happening, I guess, in the UK is the heritages are different. When you go back to Windrush and I guess what people's, the entrance to the country looks like, it's completely different from what's going on in the US right now. And what their history has been as well. And so when we look at this video, it's nice to look at it and admire and think that it's great, but it's very much alive, but in other places in the world. So don't think that it's gone or it's hiding or it's gone away. It's very much alive, but I think that you have to be in tune with that kind of scene and that generation to know what's really going on. So I just want to say that.
I mean, what I was going to say is I appreciate that, and I think that when I was thinking about this film, it put 4 plots into my head this morning. In some ways, for me, Paris and Burn is like the black gay hip hop. Okay, it's that kind of influence. And I completely what you say, Marc, when you say that it's being appropriated and taken on board in different ways around the world. In very similar ways to hip hop. The hip hop was started by young black and Latino people in the Bronx. It slowly became popular. It bled out. It became popular culture till now. We've got Iggy Azalea. Silence. But you see what I mean? So it gets appropriated, it gets taken on board, it gets filtered out, it gets diluted across the board. And that's what happens. That's what happens with culture, and that's cool. But again, it goes back to my original point. As a black gay man, as a man of colour, I really want my history acknowledged, because what I then know is that for other young men that are coming up, if they listen to Vogue by Madonna, if they're in South Korea, if wherever they are, they can go, do you know what? Young black gay people created this. We have the power to create something special and amazing that goes globally. That goes from London to San Francisco to Korea to wherever. And that is the power of it. That's the thing that I want to capture. And it's like our history. It gets smudged all of the time. And we need to acknowledge it, because if you don't know your history, you don't know where you're going to.
I can't. Yeah. Just got a question right over here.
It's actually a bit more of an anecdote that's a complete follow-on to what the last guy was saying. Years ago, I lived in Vietnam and I knew a young gay guy called T, and then I went back to Europe and I went back to Vietnam about 6-7 years later, and she was a trans woman. And when Venus Extravaganza came on the screen there, I was like, fuck, that's T. And I just think I need to go back to Vietnam and ask her if she totally modelled so many of her looks, so many of her gestures on Venus Extravaganza, because the coincidence is extraordinary otherwise.
Let's know.
Just one down at the back.
Hello. I don't have a story. I have a question. Growing up in London during the 80s and the 90s, was there a ball scene in the UK, or do you think that there could have been one that just didn't develop?
There wasn't a formal ball scene like we saw there when that happened. I think what happened for many of my generation, when I was in the 20s and mid-20s, we kind of adopted aspects of it. So we adopted the language. I remember very often going to Queer Nation in Covent Garden on a Sunday night and seeing queens break out on the floor and throw shapes and carry all of that. But in terms of a structured kind of culture where that happened, not so much. Over the years, with younger guys who have seen Paris is Burning have actually started taking up some balls, and there have been some events
Yeah,
that happen.
I've thrown a couple of balls.
Yeah, I've walked in once. Not on the field, but I've walked in a ball as well. We know that the guys at Horsemeat Disco, who are great lovers of that kind of music. I'm sorry, can I have 1 minute? That soundtrack in that film, how awesome is that soundtrack?
Some of those songs still get played today and like that.
But even those guys kind of adopted it and did Paris's Vauxhall is Gurney. But for the young black gay community that I grew up in, we didn't create something, but we adopted parts of the aesthetic. So there was a few groups of friends got together and developed their own houses and gave ourselves names, and we adopted reading, shades, snapping, all of those things we kind of took on board. So no, but we took parts of it.
I think the thing about they're never going to be able to create a ball the way that it looks in that film. You need to have that lens, that filter, that fashion, that time. So sitting here and watching it, we're like, wow, that looks amazing. To them, it might have just been the norm. Like, do you know what I mean? But to us, it's because we're not a part of it. I was throwing about 3 or 4 balls. 2 didn't work. 2 went off, and I was like, oh my god, I've done it. I've created it. But around little like underground clubs in Dalston, you can find like kids doing that. What needs to happen is that I kind of think they need a bit more like help or funding or pushing into the main kind of commercial limelight so that they can actually. Sorry, what did you just say?
What do you mean funding?
Well, actually, yeah. So I should take that back. It's there. Yeah, it's there. It's there. So do you know what? It's not. Okay, I'll take that back. It's not about funding. It's about looking for it. To be honest, they are there. You just maybe just don't know that they exist. I think there's a club called Dirty Diana at Dawson Superstore that's run by a guy called Lee. He's got a little like family. I think they're called the House of Laveau. And the main members, one's from Africa, one's from Lithuania. Like, do you get me? It's across, like mixed cultures, and they're amazing, and they vote for their lives.
Got a question right here.
Hi. I wanted to ask about film actually, because, that's obviously a really incredibly important document of kind of particularly black gay life in America. It's made by a white woman, and I was wondering whether you could speak to other work that you found important that was either made by black people or was, about similar scenes, like what's been important for you, because we hold this one up, but there must be others.
It's really funny. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier on about this, and we kind of struggled. We kind of came up with things like Tongues Up Tied by Marlon Riggs and Essex Hemphill, and Isaac Julian was Looking for Langston. And there are films which are in the canon, a handful, not that many. The most recent film I saw was called We Came to Sweat, which I saw at the film festival recently, the Gay Film Festival. I said when I saw the film, it was the best documentary about black gay life that I've seen since Paris is Burning. The director's a white lesbian woman. So that's not problematic, but I think that what it says is that we need to be in charge of telling our narratives and telling our stories. I've been having conversations with colleagues about our absence, about how we are not there in storytelling. And I think that's about us being skilled up to tell our stories, to understand that our stories are incredibly important and they're worth being heard and they're worth being listened to. So it's how do we skill up our communities to take charge to do that, so we are telling our own stories. When I think about something like Toni Morrison, who writes, and she writes for a black audience specifically, and I think that's very much what needs to happen for black and brown and LGBT communities in this country.
We have a question here.
I might well be in the minority because I actually found the film quite a challenge after my third seeing it. And I think the reason why is because of that uncritical... I don't even think it's an uncritical gaze, it's just at the centre of it is this wish to be white. And it doesn't get challenged, it's about a certain particular way about patriarchy. But there's two things that's gone on for me here, which I really find quite quite difficult. One is the fact about why or what has happened to spaces, and a sort of not an understanding that you will have an idea which is on the edge, where, and it is edgy, but capitalism will take it and will sell it and will repackage it so that it can go for everyone else. And so that's what appropriation is. Inside of that film, I saw a lot of appropriation happening, if not, and the reworking of whiteness. But the second part for me is just the fact of saying, or why we haven't talked about Ian Polk, Noah's Ark.
Thanks for that.
Or just Mail Road, which at a particular point was a focal centre for black gay life inside of London. So I think the one thing I took from the film was that we created something. And I think that's what's missing. The expectation that it's going to be given. And if we're talking about what needs to come out of this, is the fact of self-activity. And that's what that film is about.
I'm not sure if I got a complete response. I think that was a statement more than a question, right? Yeah? Okay, somebody just wants to respond.
That's the second time that I've heard someone say that it expressed people's desire to be white. And I think that's what was said. I know that's what was said. And I know that's what was said because that's what was interpreted in their minds. I associate being successful with being white. So in order for me to be successful, I have to be white first. So that was the issue that I think that stemmed from. There are plenty of people who have no desire, including myself, to ever be white. No, I would not like to burn in the sun. No, I would not like to No, I would not like that. I enjoy being myself. And so I think that when you listen to the dialogue that comes up in the film, it seems as though that's what they really wanted. But I think if you'd gone to the depth of that, it would not have been being physically white, but it was because that was what was trending at the time and what looked good, and so people wanted to be what that was because it was trending, because they themselves wanted to be trending. They did not want to be white necessarily.
And there was only a couple of categories as well, like executive realness. So in the category of executive realness, you had to show what was most real about being executive. And in the mid-80s, that would have been a rich white man. Like, do you know what I mean? So if that was what your category, what category you fell into, that's not what your aspirations were to be. Like I was saying earlier, I don't actually feel like, I don't think it's an aspiration for black gays here in the United Kingdom. I don't think it ever was and never will be. But in that time, in the US, maybe that's all they were surrounded by, so that's all they could reference.
I mean, I'm not going to. I mean, I think I'm just conscious of time as well. I think what's important here to remember is not so much just what's being represented in the film. I think one of the issues that people have is that the critique wasn't made by the filmmaker. So Jenny Livingston, when she made the film, she presented lots of issues in it, and she kind of skirts over them. So when they talk about the images that they show of whiteness, of white America, it's just put there in front of you for you to accept. So there's no dialogue for the men and women in the film to say, well, actually, why are you aspiring to that? When you look at Octavia's bedroom, why is Imam and Beverly Johnson not on the wall, but there are all these other white models? And I think that's, when you read the Hooks article about this, one of the questions is, why is this not critiqued? Why is this not asked?
I don't think it would have been...
Do you want to use the microphone? And we have a question there, so if you want to say something, then pass it back.
May I remind you that I'm not just saying that because I've seen it in the film, I'm saying that because I've also lived that. And I've been a part of that dialogue, so I'm not saying it out of context or out of because I've seen what's I've seen on the screen. I'm saying because I know it. Because I've had that conversation over a series of years, so it's not new.
I'm Marc. So I'm thinking about the other element, which is about the city and how much the city has changed. And so you have this opportunity when you look at New York or Chicago, where I'm from, or London, Brixton, where you're from, that it creates this opportunity for people to be really, really creative. And now, gentrification, which I don't necessarily think is a very bad word, but the swiftness of it as such is creating a context where you don't have that kind of diversity that creates that kind of creativity as such, that affords an opportunity for creativity. So in trying to have those opportunities where people can be creative, can produce things like that, what do we do in a city like London where it's so expensive, for poor people, because that's what happens. Poor people get together and they do creative things, right? And we don't have that context so much, certainly not in Brixton. Yeah, I live in Brixton too. Yeah. but it's shifted so much in the last 10, 15 years, right? So what happens now when we have cities that are void of those sort of spaces, or there are less of those spaces in which that creativity can happen?
What do we do to create those spaces and create it? I think, to repeat, we do things like this as a starting point. I think we do it through things like social media. We do it by engaging with the younger audience as well, but we also do it by respecting our past. And like we said before, starting to tell our narratives and to tell our stories and to find creative ways of doing so. And I think you're absolutely right that I think that I've seen in my lifetime as a gay man, I've seen kind of, this is my perception and I'll own it, a kind of dip in our creative output. And maybe that's because I'm older and I don't engage in it in the same way as I once did. Maybe it's on Twitter and Facebook in places that I don't experience it. But I think there is a real need for that because it's a richness and it enables and empowers us to do so. The answer to that, I'm not entirely sure. It's something I hope to see come forward in the future.
We have a response over here.
The point I was talking about was what happens in the film. It's not about how we live our lives, it's what does the film do. So I was talking about inside of the film, quite central is the fact that it is about women. That's what people inside of the film aspire to. It gets critiqued. You have Dorian Corey who says, well, actually, this is what the children are doing today. Once upon a time, we used to have Lee Lawn, and he makes another person, but now what they aspire to is this. That was the period then. I wasn't talking about how we live our lives. It's what does the film do? And that's what the comment was about.
I think a film like that, it's a cult film, so until a period of time has passed, at the time that it comes out, no one's going to critique it in the way that it's going to get critiqued now. Do you know what I mean? No one's going to ask those questions until now, because at the time, that was the norm, and most probably, nobody saw the film in the kind of mass that it can be seen now, because it would have been underground. So, do you know what I mean? It needed time to go past before we can ask these kinds of type of questions, like, why is it really aspiring to be a white rich woman? Like, do you know what I mean?
But isn't that another film?
Yeah, and it is another film, and it's a film that maybe we can now create.
As a woman, I find it quite amazing that people aspire to be women. It's just, that's really revolutionary in a way. And I think it's quite interesting that most of the filmmakers that have been captured, the black cultural scenes, are women, because for once it's something, I know, the racial part, but I think that's something that really resonates with me, that femininity and it's a certain kind of creativity and visual celebratory in a completely celebratory way and with so much vitality, and I think there is value in that, and the resilience, because when you need inspiration, you need that creativity, that outlet as well, and it's created that they stimulate forward.
If you want to respond to that, we're going to take 3 more questions. Go one here, and then one in the middle, and if anybody wants, you shout now. Okay, I see a hand, so you're the last.
So I've got a really just quick response to Sylvia. And whenever I watch that film, and I see the men dressed as women and doing drag, for me, they are doing something hugely incredible. They are black men. And black men, as we know, have an image. We have to be masculine, we have to be strong, we have to be all of these things in the eyes of our black male and female counterparts, in the eyes of the wider white world. And if we transgress that, we are a whole host of things. And what those kids do on there is brave. They stand up and they own their truth. And for all of the aspiring to whiteness, to be women, to all the rest of it, they're owning their truth. How many of us can say that? And that for me is power.
I was going to say it before, and I feel like it speaks to a lot of what people are saying about disappearing spaces and about like maybe a loss of radicalism or whatever. Over 1,000 people walked through the streets of Brixton on Saturday, and a lot of them were queer black bodies. You know, we were the ones that were dancing around the sound system, we were marching down the street to Destiny's Child while the riot police watched, and that's happening, so the spaces are going. But the creativity and the truth is not gone, it's there, but it's not going to be on the news because that's not, you know, all we get is, oh, Foxton's tear gas. But it is happening and it's there. So
the reason why the spaces have disappeared, I feel like the reason why there's less and less gay spaces is because the more that time moves on, this is what we kind of essentially wanted, was to be equal counterparts to the heterosexual community. So there's a less need now to have a gay space because there's no longer gay clubbing and straight clubbing, it's just clubbing. Yeah. You go out to dance with your friends. Yeah. I don't feel like I need to go out gay clubbing tomorrow night. I'm going to go out clubbing and my friends from school will be there that I was in class with, alongside my gay friends that I've met and the other straight people that I've met since I've left school. Like, I wouldn't want in like 30 years' time to look back and there still be this whole idea of it being gay clubbing versus straight clubbing, because why can't we just all go out and party? Why can't we just get along? Yeah, like I go out to have a good time, do you get what I mean? So, do you know, obviously most people go out and you most probably met your partner or your other half on that dance floor, but you don't now in 2015 have to go to a gay club to meet your partner. You should just be able to go out to a club with your friends, there's a guy over there and you think he's hot, and he also thinks you're hot too, and you can, like, do you get what I mean? Like, if not, why can't we then push forward, push more events like this now? Like, do you know what I mean? Kind of like, make spaces where it should just have to be right now, so gay people just in this space. There should be straight people here as well that have an opinion on what is going on, because it involves, we're all human.
We're slowly gonna wind down here. Someone's have a question over here.
Hi, Ford. Thanks. I really enjoyed the discussions tonight. It was amazing seeing the film again. I must have seen it in the early 90s, and I've recognised all the characters again, all the people in it. I appreciate what you said earlier, Mark, about adversity, and I'm struck by the way in which what was going on is a product of oppression, and if you remove the oppression, the thing isn't there anymore. Typically, oppressive groups come to envy the thing that an oppressed group develop precisely in order to deal with the adversity of their oppression. So Gentiles envy Jews their tight family structure. Men envy women their emotional literacy. Whites envy blacks their music. Is it something to be sad about that doesn't exist anymore? Because does its non-existence mean that the extreme adversity is no longer there? If the adversity is still there, as you said before the film, what are the cultural expressions or ways in which we're creating resistance to those oppressions now? And how can we foster those?
Big question. It's a news list, thank you. So, if we remove the adversity, how do we create? And if we still have the adversity there, what are we creating? Is that, in essence, what you're saying? This is a tough one. I'm not seeing, and this, again, I'm going to own this, I'm not seeing a lot being created. I just don't. But, again, that may be because I'm an older man and I'm kind of slightly disengaged from part of the community, part of the scene. But I do think that there's still the drive and the enthusiasm and the motivation to do it. And I think for many young, particularly LGBT people of colour, it's about finding the space and the avenues to express that. But I think if we look across all of our communities, if we for 1 minute take race out of it, if we look at a lot of our LGBT communities, where is creativity coming from? Where is the stuff coming from? Because in some ways, many of us, and I've heard it kind of expressed today a little bit, feel the battles have been won. I mean, Marc talked here really eloquently about not having a need for gay clubs, not having a need for spaces. Why can't we all just be together? And I think it's a lovely idea, and it's one I think is great. But when we have our own spaces, when we are kind of faced up against the wall of oppression or whatever it is, beautiful things come out of that. How do we foster it? I think we mentor. I think us as older men and women in this audience, we take on board younger people, we share stuff like this that we've done tonight, and we let people know that there's a really rich history there that needs to be maintained and needs to be moved forward.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like we need to encourage more events like this, where people can sit down and talk and share ideas and knowledge, instead of it just being topless in the dark, so much fat lasers. No, there's time for that too, but I definitely feel like there's always going to be a club open that we can go and do that with, but I feel like something like this, is so beneficial. It makes me so happy to be able to sit on this stage and be able to have this conversation with people, because I've longed to do it for such a long time and haven't been provided with that space to do it. So if we want it, then tonight when we get home, we need to put on Facebook that we enjoyed how much we all came together and talk about it, so people know that, FOMO, fear of missing out. People tonight, if you go home and make it sound exciting and talk about how much you enjoyed yourself, people are going to be like, oh, well, the next time it's on, I might want to come down and join in on that because they had so much fun doing it last time. And I think we just need to kind of express how much we have enjoyed and how much we've learned from having this event tonight.